everybody, it's Shelby Forsythia back at you again with another Wednesday live video coming at you from my living room today, which is freshly painted. Gorgeous. Today I want to jump in and talk about grief and trigger warnings. This topic's been on my mind since I read the University of Chicago had released a letter to incoming freshmen saying that they did not support trigger warnings or the creation of safe spaces on campus. And that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but I couldn't quite figure out why, so I did a little bit of dissecting, and this is what I came up with. So the University of Chicago believes that trigger warnings, quote, trigger warnings in safe spaces can help individuals retreat from ideas and perspectives that are at odds with their own. So they think that from what it sounds like, they believe that trigger warnings in safe spaces are a way for people to escape learning. And I have a problem with this because I think that the University of Chicago and people who are against trigger warnings in general kind of miss the point of trigger warnings. So there's an implication that they make that trigger warnings prevent people from hearing the truth, from experiencing something in their life that's different from their own life experience, or from growing into well-rounded people. And a lot of what I've heard is that trigger warnings will baby people or will coddle people. And that's not at all the point of trigger warnings or safe spaces. So I personally view trigger warnings and safe spaces, especially trigger warnings, as like movie ratings. So you kind of get a glimpse of what's to come, especially if they're preceding like an article or a video, or even just like a post on Facebook or Instagram or something like that, where somebody's about to rant, or there's like a graphic video attached or something like that. And just like movie ratings, you're equipped with the knowledge not to view the video, not to read the article, not to participate in the event if it's something that you think is going to upset you or bring things to the surface that you're not quite ready to have seen in the public eye. And people standing up against trigger warnings, I think their argument that it prevents people from being well-rounded or from being exposed to the truth is intellectual. And the Grief Recovery Institute has a saying that says emotionally or intellectually true, up here, emotionally not helpful. And so things created out of intellect are often true, but emotionally that's not it's not helpful at all to people who are in pain or people in hurting or people who need to hear things like trigger warnings and to have safe spaces. So trigger warnings and safe spaces are not intellectual; they're emotional. They were created out of fear and trauma and grief and loss, and they're a search for safety and community. And at their core, they're emotional beacons that tell other people that we understand that you've hurt and we understand that you've had pain. So roots of PTSD and of trigger warnings go back to the 1960s, back when the phrase shell shock kind of came onto the scene. And then in the 1980s, PTSD as a diagnosis was added to the DSM, and since then has been added to and revised to include things like sexual abuse, even domestic abuse or abuse as a child, natural disasters like surviving hurricanes or earthquakes or things like that, and then just other general life traumas. And war is obviously still included in one of those. So to say that trigger warnings baby people or keep people from learning or keep people from being exposed to the truth, I think that view is kind of cold and incorrect. It's intellectual. Trigger warnings are born out of kindness and community, and a kindness that hurt and grieving souls offer other hurt and grieving souls to kind of warn them that there's pain ahead, or there could be pain ahead. The creators of trigger warnings are not self-infantilizing, like many people speculate. They have already lived through hell. So the people that trigger warnings are created for have already lived a hell of an experience, whether that was a war-torn city, whether that was a sexual assault or a rape, whether that was a natural disaster like a hurricane, tornado, earthquake, something that has ripped their lives apart. People living with PTSD and people who trigger warnings are created for, they don't need to be reminded that there is evil or hurt or bad in the world, because they already know. They have already lived it. So to say that these people are babies and that they're being coddled by being offered trigger warnings in safe spaces is to say that you have absolutely zero understanding of what they have been through as people. And society is really quick to tell us to grow up, to get over it or to let it go. But that's really, really hard to do when we're not allowed space or community or safety to grieve. and to process. And that's a lot of what the Grief Recovery Institute and the Grief Recovery Method provides to people. It is not necessarily a program for moving through PTSD, but it is a program for moving through grief and loss. And it teaches us that one of the biggest factors in being able to move through grief and loss is being able to have a safe space just to speak and to be heard. And safe spaces and trigger warnings, as well as all the communities that they create, allow hurt and grieving people to find room. They create room to recognize the things that these grieving people need. From society, from family and friends, and even from themselves. It gives them an opportunity to kind of step back into somewhere that's cushioned, and that they get to choose to stay for a moment and just breathe and regroup before they move out. I read an article in the New Republic that says, as silly as trigger warnings and safe spaces may seem on the surface, they are rooted in genuine, widely accepted science. And there's even a psychiatrist who did work with both civilians and soldiers, I'm reading from an article now, who said that we have to confront the unconsummated grief of people, impacted grief in which an encapsulated, never-ending past deprives the present of meaning. I know in my own experience, I was not diagnosed with PTSD, and I would not diagnose myself with PTSD, but in the midst of my own grief story, immediately after my mom was diagnosed with cancer, I know I was in college at the time, and I know that any mention of cancer, of death, of chemo, even in October, seeing all of the pink and Save the Tatas and all this other promotion across campus was enough to send my brain into like a tailspin for the rest of the day, because I was like, this is happening to me, this is my life, this is my family, this is death, this is real. And in another moment, I was enrolled in a political humor class, and you would think that would have nothing to do with what happened to me and my story, but one day our entire topic was death and funerals, and I distinctly remember, it was about 2 months after my mom had died, and I distinctly remember just running out of the room in tears, because I could not handle something that was so close to my own grief event, chronologically close. Even just the slightest mention of death, dying, having to be at a funeral, even funerals being funny, was not it. I couldn't handle it. And trigger warnings and safe spaces are not to say that we should not express emotion openly and widely and vulnerably with all the people that we share our lives with, classrooms, events, public spaces, what have you. But in a lot of ways, trigger warnings and safe spaces help us decide when and where and how and if we're ready to express those emotions in public to other people. And in a society that teaches us not to express any negative emotion, it takes massive energy and massive courage and massive self-assurance to cry in public or to have a breakdown or to be affected by something, because the immediate emotional response of society, or the intellectual response of society, is often negative or distant or fixing, which is no fun at all. And immediately following a death or a war or a sexual assault or a natural disaster, sometimes we just don't have that energy in us to be able to grieve in public and to know that other people may not understand that. And the places that we can express those emotions are the safe spaces that have been created by others who are in pain. That's where we're allowed to rest and to heal, and that's where we are allowed to recuperate. That's where we regain some control over our lives and are given the freedom to choose how we want to participate in life again. So before you criticize the new generation or the politically correct or the touchy-feely people for babying people with trigger warnings and safe spaces, take a minute to walk in the shoes of someone with PTSD, to experience things like shock or invasion or total destruction or loss or grief or death. And remember the things in your own life that you couldn't necessarily handle after these things happen to you, even if they seem small or insignificant. And then to come home, or to come to where you thought was home, and to be greeted by things like the news, like videos, like YouTube, like Facebook, or a brash political speaker, or people who are just asking how you are and using these trigger words or trigger sounds or trigger phrases that you remember hearing. For me, trigger warnings are all about compassion and about love. They say, I understand you have seen pain, and I hear you. And all hurting people are ever really looking for is to be heard and to be truly, truly listened to. So thank you for joining me on this live video Wednesday. I want to know your thoughts on trigger warnings. So if you're watching this video live or after the fact, leave a little comment below and we can start a discussion on how trigger warnings have helped you, where you've seen them, if you agree with their usage or not, or if you agree with the backlash against trigger warnings or not. And share this video with your friends. I know that trigger warnings are kind of a hot topic right now, circulating the news. So let me know what you and your friends and your family think. Tonight I'm starting my first of two grief recovery groups for fall 2016. It's from 7 to 9 in the Andersonville, Chicago neighborhood. There's still time to sign up until next week. It's got the first two sessions are open, and then immediately after we will close that for the remaining 6 weeks of the recovery group. And then if for any reason you're not free on Wednesday nights, Monday nights I will have another group starting on October 3rd, and that one goes through November 21st, also in Chicago's Andersonville neighborhood. You can find all the details, a free live video of me explaining the program, as well as some links to the Grief Recovery Institute, which is where I'm trained and certified, on that site as well, and then information about parking, information about registration and getting signed up and all that jazz over at my website, which is shelbyforsythia.com. Thank you so much for sharing space with me once again this week, and I will see you next time.